Okay, so I want to talk about the Acolyte episode 3. A lot of people are saying this is one of the most controversial Star Wars anything ever released, let alone episodes from one of the Disney series. This episode specifically is so divisive, and I think for a number of reasons, because a lot of people are saying it's destroying Star Wars. This is destroying Star Wars' identity, and Star Wars is changing purely because what the Acolyte is doing, because of where they're taking the show, where they're taking the Jedi, the way they're portraying the Jedi, and also a specific link to Anakin. A lot of people are arguing that this episode is making Anakin not as special as he actually is because of the way May and Osha have supposedly been created using a different version of the Force known as the Thread. These witches are clearly a Force-sensitive, I want to say cult, who refer to the Force as the Thread and are building out this different part of the Star Wars galaxy. This episode was so heavy on the new Star Wars lore, really trying to give us an understanding of who these characters are, their origin story, and how there's many different sides to the Force. How they exist in this seemingly female-only society of Force users, or Thread users.
We were hunted, persecuted, forced into hiding.
The fact Osha and May were conceived using only the Force, just as Anakin was conceived, there was no father, as they say, I think isn't such a bad thing. Sure, Anakin was special and Palpatine did create him using the Force, I believe. But who's to say that Anakin is the only one created in this way? Perhaps Palpatine learned this power of doing so from these witches. Now, that said, all of the lore building, world building, Anakin drama aside, for me, this episode was just so slow paced. I was only a few minutes in and just being like, where is this going? What is this dialogue? What are they saying to each other? I know it's going heavy on the world building and is in some ways trying to replicate what George Lucas was doing with the prequels, building out the politics and lore of the Star Wars galaxy, which is a bit of a contrast to, I guess, what he did in the original trilogy, which was much more just about the adventure. But all that said, for me, the pacing of this episode really just did not do it. And also, it's left a lot of questions, obviously, but there was no point in this episode where I thought it needed to leave questions, I want to say. For example, we now know that May is completely crazy, is the reason for the fire.
It's not up to you. You can't stop me. Yes, I can. How? I'll kill you.
And is potentially the reason that this entire cult of witches have been killed. But it doesn't seem like the fire is what killed them. It did make it out that the Jedi needed to get out of there in a rush for whatever reason, just because the place was burning and about to explode further, I guess. But to me, it didn't look like there was enough fire in here or even signs of burning that all of these characters had been killed from the fire. It looks like some other evil is at play here. And I'm wondering if it's to do with the Coral character, this witch, who's seemingly the second in command here behind the mother. Also, what happened here really does not seem reason enough for Torben to kill himself in the previous episode. If this is what he's been holding on to, the events of this episode, then it really doesn't seem like enough happened here. It seems like there's a lot of mystery around it, but I just don't think they did a great job of showing that mystery. For example, why did the Jedi need to leave here in such a rush? Why did they need to get Osha out of here? Why not stick around and actually try and help these villagers, help the witches? Sure, they were all seemingly dead, but here's the other thing. We actually don't know that they're all dead. They could just be lying here unconscious. No one really went to check. And for me, this is just one part of where this episode is problematic. Like I said, the pacing of this was so slow, but also just the way the Jedi entered the camp during the ceremony, interrupting here. Why did they choose this point in time to do so? It just seemed strange and out of place. And yes, this series is in some ways trying to show the arrogance and downside of the Jedi, their folly, the fact that in some ways a lot of people are afraid of them throughout the galaxy. But it just seems strange that all these 4 Jedi came here to get the 2 children. Something darker and deeper is at play here. And I don't know if they're just not letting us on, but they're also not doing a great job of building the mystery around this. I'm just confused. I'm not intrigued or puzzled. I'm just like, why are they even here? What's the point? There needs to be some more reason for me to understand their motivations for coming to this planet, apart from getting Osha and May to come and become Padawans and join the Jedi Order. Also, for me, the best part of this episode, and I think the previous 2 episodes, is Master Soul, played by Li Zhangzhe. His character and screen presence is stronger than any others, I believe, but I still felt that his connection and bond with Osha was was really superficial and formed too simply. How is anyone of Osha's age able to make such life-changing decisions on her own? Choosing to leave her mother behind even though she's literally been told she's never going to see her mother again, it just seems a bit weak.
If we pass, they take us away. We never see Mama again.
I know she's feeling out of place here. I know she feels like a bit of a stranger among her own people and even with her mother and her sister. But at the same time, it just seems strange that she would connect to Master Soul so quickly without really any further explanation or grand event happening here. One thing I will say I really liked is the Jedi ship design. Really cool, unique looking ship. Kind of reminding me of Ahsoka's. I guess it's just some of the colors that are similar. Kel Naka working on the speeder bike is also kind of cool. And his grunts and roars are adding some personality to his character. But I mean, he's a Wookiee. We love Wookiees. And I shouldn't be highlighting these as the standouts of this episode.
Hi.
I've seen some people praising this episode and saying it's doing a great job of following the prequels tradition of building out this world and building the lore, building more of the Star Wars backstory. The fact the Star Wars galaxy is expanding further and further though, the fact we are getting so many more niche little characters and worlds and different interpretations of what the Force is, for me is making Star Wars smaller. Star Wars with each episode like this is becoming more and more niche. And personally for me, this episode feels like it would be even harder to watch if you weren't already a fan of Star Wars. I think Star Wars in recent times should still try to broaden its wings to reach a larger audience that potentially aren't already Star Wars fans. And I think The Mandalorian did a great job of that. The Mandalorian has such iconic imagery, and even people who aren't Star Wars fans pretty much know who Grogu and the Mando are. I would love to know if you disagree with any of my opinions. They are just my opinions, and at the end of the day, Star Wars is just entertainment. It's supposed to be fun. That said, for me, this isn't fun. I'm not enjoying this episode. We're 3 episodes in now. Andor had 3 episodes, and the first 3 were potentially a bit slow, which I talked about in last week's version of this series, I guess, this episode, but I was still much more intrigued. I've heard that things are happening in the next episode of The Acolyte, that there's going to be a huge reveal or twist or something like that. I'm not really sure what that means and whether they're just rumors, but it feels like a pretty big ask to basically already get through half a season of an 8-episode series to finally get somewhere and get interested in the show. This is really missing the mark for me. This is not Star Wars that I'm enjoying, and it's rare that I honestly say bad things about Star Wars. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad though. I know some people are connecting with it. For me, this is just losing a bit of identity and doesn't feel like the Star Wars that I want to see. Can I say that? Also, not gonna lie, some of the dialogue between the 2 girls was just a bit painful.
The Jedi are bad.
The Jedi are good. What have you done? What have you done? What have you done?
The problem for me at this point is also that the only real reason I'm watching this series is because it's Star Wars, is because I'm hoping to see something that reminds me of how much I love Star Wars. If this was any other show outside of Star Wars, I would have stopped watching by this point because it's just not for me. Also, really didn't enjoy the witch chant.
The power of 2. The power of many.
By this point, I was literally like, what on earth am I watching? What is this? Like, what are they saying? Why are they saying this? I get it, they're trying to build a new part of the Star Wars lore. I totally understand that. It just feels weird, man. I don't know, it's really not doing it for me. And yes, not all Star Wars has to be about lightsabers and blasters and action and violence, and I know they're trying to build a deeper backstory here, but pacing was slow, writing felt sloppy, there are plot holes which I'm assuming are going to be resolved, I'm hoping are going to be resolved. Like I mentioned, the Jedi leaving the planet, the fact a child can make her own decisions about what she's going to do for basically the rest of her life. And I think we should also talk a bit about the cinematography and production design, because for a show that has something like an $180 million budget, I'm really not seeing evidence of that. I don't know where the money is going. I'm not saying it looks bad, it just doesn't look like anything that impressive. The sets kind of just feel flat and unmemorable. I complained a bit about Obi-Wan Kenobi's production design, especially some of the Tatooine scenes. You could really tell they were using Industrial Light and Magic's The Volume stage, where they have a giant LED screen behind the characters, and I feel like you get another sense of that here. Everything just feels kind of small and cheap and like TV production value, which It shouldn't be. $180 million, that's a lot. And this is Star Wars, so you'd expect a bit more. I guess they are building worlds, and it is kind of just a foresty planet with some stone caves, but it just seems like there should be more going on here. This is probably the most critical I've been of Star Wars in a while. This one really didn't sit well with me. And I'd love to know your thoughts about this episode in the comments below. If you want more of these kinds of videos, subscribe to the channel. Lots of Star Wars clips coming. I cover everything Star Wars here. And I also just got to play Star Wars Outlaws at a special event in LA held by Ubisoft. So if you want to see my impressions on Outlaws, then go over to my main channel and check that out there. Thanks for watching this. My name's Andrew. I'll catch you soon.